There are places that exist only in ink, stubbornly clinging to the edges of old maps long after the world has forgotten them. One such place haunted the imaginations of ancient geographers for over 1,000 years, a vast island suspended at the bottom of the known world. They called it Taprobane, a name whispered through the marble halls of Alexandria and etched onto parchment by trembling lamplight. If you unroll the fragile vellum of history, you will find its silhouette looming beneath India, impossibly large, impossibly silent. To the Greeks and Romans, this was not legend, but a confirmed realm of cinnamon groves, wise elephants, and shores washed by a burning sea. Yet, as centuries passed and ships grew bolder, the island began to drift, to shrink, and to slip through the fingers of the world's greatest cartographers. The mystery of Taprobane is not merely a geographic error. It is a mirror reflecting humanity's ancient struggle to measure the infinite with a finite mind. Tonight, we journey into the fog of maritime legend to trace the phantom contours of an island that refused to stay where reality demanded it. Shadows gather over the Sea of Zanj, and the salt wind carries the faint whisper of a puzzle that may never be solved. Our story begins not on a beach, but in the vast, echoing Library of Alexandria, where a man named Claudius Ptolemy compiled the map of the cosmos. It was the 2nd century after Christ, and Ptolemy gazed upon the reports of merchants who had crossed the monsoon winds and returned with tales of a distant paradise. He pressed a reed pen to papyrus and drew the island far below the equator, endowing it with a dramatic scale that dwarfed the lands above it. On his world map, Taprobane swallowed the Indian Ocean, its northern tip grazing the Tropic of Capricorn, a massive continent mistaken for an island. Almost immediately, the mistake was sealed into the bedrock of European science, a phantom made flesh by the authority of a single name. The evidence for the enigma lies scattered across centuries of cartographic art, each map a silent witness to a shifting truth. A sailor in a Roman tavern would tell you that Taprobane was a place of immense wealth, where tortoise shells were used as roofs and pearls glowed on the seabed. Pliny the Elder, gathering these whispers in his natural history, fixed its distance from India as a 20-day voyage by the southern wind. The words of Pliny and Ptolemy became the twin pillars of a geographic dogma that no subsequent silence could easily dismantle. As the Middle Ages took hold, Christian scholars in damp monasteries labored to copy these ancient coordinates with holy, terrified precision. To question Ptolemy was almost to question the divine order. The island remained colossal and unmoving on the illuminated Mappa Mundi. Look closely at the Catalan Atlas or the Fra Mauro map, and you will see a breathtaking paradise painted with golden roofs and bearded kings. The physical evidence of its existence seemed absolute, because the maps themselves were treated as primary artifacts equal to the soil underfoot. But when Arab dhows and Chinese treasure fleets pierced the monsoon routes, the whispered rumors of a colossal southern continent began to fracture. Merchants docking in Calicut described a green, teardrop-shaped island that matched the spice riches, but not the Titanic scale. We know this emerald isle today as Sri Lanka, a land of ancient citadels and fragrant air, yet the math refused to reconcile. The real Sri Lanka sat just 30 miles off the tip of India, while cartographic Taprobane still loomed 1,000 miles to the south. This was the first terrible crack in the mirror. Either Ptolemy had been horribly wrong, or the map contained a truth deeper than mere geometry. As Vasco da Gama's ships rounded the Cape of Good Hope, the physical ocean began to punish the ancient illusion with its vast, empty horizons. When Portuguese navigators finally stood on the cinnamon-scented shores of Ceylon, they faced an excruciating cognitive dissonance. The spices were identical. The elephants were there. Even the name sounded like an echo. Yet the latitude was a ghost, off by a fatal margin. Faced with the impossible, the human mind often performs a desperate surgery. And the cartographers of the 16th century were no different. They simply dragged the island northward, shrinking its monstrous footprint with the delicate scratches of a copperplate engraver's tool. Sebastian Münster and Ortelius, giants of Renaissance mapmaking, performed a quiet exorcism, folding the legend back into the reality of Ceylon. For a moment, the puzzle seemed solved. Taprobane was just a magnification error, a whisper that had grown into a giant through the echo chamber of cloistered scholarship. But the labyrinth of this mystery does not offer such a clean escape, and the ghost of the island refused to be banished so easily. Other scholars, peering through their astrolabes, pointed a trembling finger much further east toward the dense jungles of Sumatra. The Roman geographer Pomponius Mela had noted a vast eastern dimension, a landscape of gold and fierce tribes that did not fit the Sinhalese profile. Sumatra, with its volcanic spine and ancient Malay kingdoms, became a fierce rival for the identity of Taprobane in the academic wars of Europe. This is where archaeology faltered, and local legend began to fill the silence, for the name itself held a clue in its ancient syllables. Some linguists have traced a dark, beautiful thread through time, connecting the Greek Taprobane to the Sanskrit Tamraparni. That copper hue exists both in the red soils of Sri Lanka and in the dusky rivers of the Sumatran highlands, blurring the boundary between the two claimants. A darker hypothesis suggests that we are searching for a piece of physical geography that no longer exists above the waves at all. Imagine the cataclysm, a massive island, perhaps a southern extension of the Indian shelf, torn apart by a rupture of the Sunda megathrust. If the sea floor swallowed a low-lying landmass in some prehistoric deluge, the memory would survive only as a distorted echo on a Ptolemaic grid. There is a deep, unnerving logic to the idea that Ptolemy measured a landmass that was already drowning, chronicling the final hours of a lost world. Yet, where science finds only a gap in the seabed, the human hunger for narrative demands a more tangible explanation, dragging us into the realm of philosophy. The greatest cartographers became deeply traumatized by Taprobane. It was the ink-stained ghost that haunted the age of discovery. Mercator, the genius who folded the sphere onto a flat plane, debated the island's true size obsessively in his correspondence, unable to reconcile ancient authority with new logs. To admit that an entire continent of the mind was a simple misprojection was to admit that the ancestors they revered were profoundly, dangerously blind. You can feel this psychological vertigo in the margins of their maps, where monsters and mythic beasts often fill the void left by evaporating certainties. The obsession drove explorers to risk their lives, searching for the precise location of an island that changed shape depending on which century's books you read. Entire expeditions, financed by jewel-hungry monarchs, disappeared into the dense green hell of the eastern archipelago, chasing the phantom of a massive southern Taprobane. They found nothing but the relentless equatorial sun and the mocking stillness of the mangrove swamps. Yet the mapmakers in Europe kept drawing it. Because the map had ceased to represent the physical earth, it had become a document of faith, a relic as sacred as a saint's bone. The story of Taprobane is a requiem for the hubris of the human eye, whispering that we see what we are prepared to see, and nothing more. Look at a modern satellite image of the Indian Ocean, a perfect blue sphere devoid of secrets, and try to understand their lost panic. The clockwork of scientific progress ground down the scale of Taprobane year by year, shrinking it like a fading memory in a dying man's mind. By the 18th century, the giant of Ptolemy had been fully dismembered, its spices given to Ceylon, its gold to Sumatra, its vastness buried in the sea. The name itself became a faint archaic whisper on the lips of poets, a metaphor for a paradise lost that no longitude could ever fix. Today, historians debate the trauma of this cartographic collapse, suggesting that the loss of Taprobane broke something vital in the European soul. When you prove that a defining feature of your world is nothing but a projection of dogma, how do you trust the lens of your own senses again? The sands of time cover all maps, but the echo of Taprobane remains a stubborn frequency in the static of history. Some researchers theorize that the error originated not in malice, but in the poetry of trade routes, a distortion of days converted into miles of land. A sailor would say, "We sailed south for 20 days." And in the translation between human memory and geometric projection, the island grew vast and moved toward the pole. The deeper we dig into this labyrinth of translation, the more we understand that the island is a product of language itself, a vast territory built from syntax alone. The human obsession lies in the silence of the maps that followed, the terrifying blank spaces where Taprobane used to breathe. In those quiet auction houses under white gloves, you realize we are still trying to hold a phantom that promises an answer to the unanswerable. What toll did it take on the men who dedicated their lives to an island that was a mathematical impossibility? Imagine the fragile scribe, hunched over a candle, painstakingly adding gold leaf to the shores of Taprobane, only to have the next generation erase it with a blade. We seek certainty in our coordinate systems, but Taprobane reminds us that the Earth itself is a stranger who discards the names we gift it. The existential implication is heavy and cold, like a diver touching the hull of a sunken ship in the dark. The truth is, we domesticated the world by killing the great southern continent and assigning the scraps to the places we could physically pierce with a flag. Yet the mystery of Taprobane endures not in fact, but in the way it illuminates the profound, hungry love of the ancients for a beauty they could not see. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle, but as you stand at the edge of this silence, the abyss stares back with Ptolemaic eyes. Taprobane represents the eternal friction between the map and the territory, the shadow cast by the human longing to impose order on a finite canvas. We are all heirs to this disorientation. Every time a modern theory is overthrown, we feel the same catastrophic vertigo that the geographers of the Renaissance felt. The final pages of the story are written in disappearing ink because the island no longer belongs to geology, but to the cartography of the human imagination. It sinks away every time you try to focus on it, retreating into the fog of a forgotten possibility, a paradise that no satellite will ever capture. The relics of this search are not broken pottery or sunken columns, but the weathered stone of our epistemic certainties, eroded by the salt wind of doubt. We began this journey in the halls of an ancient library, and we end it in the vast, uncharted waters of the human mind, where Taprobane still reigns supreme. The cartographer's greatest puzzle remains open, a wound in the map of the world that no amount of GIS or deep-sea sonar can finally cauterize. Because the enduring enigma does not ask us where the island went, but rather why we felt such an aching need for it to exist in the first place. Perhaps the lost island is a memory of a time before the world had shrunk, a period when the horizon was not a limit, but a promise of divine mystery. We are left with the faint, rusted scent of cinnamon on the empty wind, a sensory phantom of a land that lives only in the collective memory of our errors. And so, Taprobane fades, not with a bang, but with the slow turning of a tide over a sandbar that was never truly there. The listener, in the silent dark, might feel a pang of recognition, a sudden mapping of their own personal Taprobanes, the certainties that dissolved upon a closer look. The ultimate curse of this mystery is not its complexity, but its profound humanity. It is a fable about the death of a beautiful delusion. If you listen closely to the rustle of an old atlas page, you are hearing the eulogy for a giant, a whispered apology from a generation that knew they were destroying heaven. The clockwork of the solar system spins on, and the sand runs through the hourglass. But the shadow of Taprobane remains immovable in the abyss of the collective psyche. And in the end, as the fog rolls over the uncharted sea, we understand that the only true map is the one that admits it is filled with dragons and ghosts.